Welcome back to Pokemon TCG Pocket Academy. Last time we had an intro class where we talked about the basics of combat, got into a little bit of discussion about strategy and things like that, but right now we're going to go into the depths of talking about everything from how a Pokemon card works, its anatomy, how to put together decks, strategy as far as items and supporters, and all the different things that you need to know to put together a perfect deck to get ready for battle. The first thing we're going to do is talk about what is an actual Pokemon card and how do you even read these things. All right, let's start from the beginning and we'll talk about one of the favorite starters from the very beginning of Pokemon, and that is this card right here, the Squirtle. The very first thing to note is at the top left corner, you'll see that this is a basic Pokemon card. Now, basic Pokemon cards come in a variety of flavors and strength levels. Just because a Pokemon is basic doesn't necessarily mean that it's a weak Pokemon, but it does qualify for eligibility to be put on the field when the game begins, and that's the most important part. The next thing you see is a name of this card. Now, it might be apparent that obviously this is the name of the card, but for game rules specifically, you need to know that any card that shares this exact same name is considered the exact same Pokemon on the field. For instance, there's a card called Mankey. Mankey that you see now on the left is a completely different card than Mankey that you see on the right. And although they share the same name, they do fight differently. They have different statistics. However, the game considers these the exact same Pokemon. And for deck building purposes, you can only have two of any one card that shares the same name. That's important to remember. Next thing you see is the Pokemon hit points. This can be considered the amount of damage that a Pokemon can take before it will be knocked out on the battlefield. Depending on the type of Pokemon, this can either be 1, 2, or maybe even 3 points in the future. Inside the hit points is an indicator called the Pokemon type. Now, within Pokemon, there are considered 10 types in the Pokemon TCG Pocket app. Probably only see these 10 types, at least for the near future, but if they ever add the 11th type, just know that Fairy is a Pokemon type that you can encounter as far as the cards are concerned. Beneath that, you see the artwork that is associated with the card. The artwork does not have any bearing on gameplay, but artwork can vary wildly. Artwork is generally the main draw for collectors. And if you are interested, just know that there are usually multiple artworks, especially amongst the most popular of the Pokemon within a set. Underneath the artwork, you'll see some things that are related to the Pokedex, such as the number of the Pokemon, type of Pokemon, its height, weight, so forth and so on. Again, these things do not change the gameplay of TCG Pocket. Underneath the artwork and the dex information is probably the most important part of the card, and that is the abilities and the attacks that the Pokemon have. Here, for this card, you see it is an easy and simple card, which is why we chose it first. It has one attack. That attack is called Water Gun. Water Gun is going to do 20 damage, which you see on the right side of the name. Damage indicators are always followed by its name. On the left side of the name, you see an icon that looks like the type of Pokemon, but this is a different thing. Let me explain. Moves require water energy. Energy is something that you're awarded once every turn, and that energy is allowed to be placed on any Pokemon, either on the bench or on the active Pokemon, so long as there's no rules or any Pokemon abilities preventing that from happening. I'll show you a Pokemon now, Dragonite, which has a dragon type, but the energy required to use its cards are both water and lightning. So it is considered a more complex card, but once you know how it works, it simplifies the matter. Underneath the attack type, you see the weakness of the Pokemon. And this is also a very important thing, because if you run into a deck that has all of the strengths that your Pokemon do not want to see, you have to strategize around that. Here, Squirtle is weak to the electric type Pokemon, in which it will receive 20 extra damage. Now, also important to note that this is an indicator of the Pokemon type, not the move or the energy required from a Pokemon's move. So if a Pokemon, say, Dragonite, again, is a dragon type, but it does its move, which requires water and electricity energy. You do not receive weakness from Dragonite. Dragonite's type would be dragon, and it would require a weakness of dragon in order to receive that plus 20 weakness damage. To the right of the weakness, you see a retreat cost. Sometimes when your Pokemon is the active Pokemon on the field, you want to retreat them back before they receive any fatal damage, which requires them then to be knocked out. In order to do so, you must pay energy and have that energy removed off of the card, something that does not normally happen when you attack. Say when Squirtle uses Water Gun, as long as they have one energy on this card, they will be able to use Water Gun infinitely until it is no longer on the field. Sometimes you will see text such as here with Charmander, where Charmander must remove one of the fire energy in order to use its attack Ember. This is not an issue with Squirtle. However, for all Pokemon, when there is a retreat cost, you must pay that energy and remove it off of the card when it is removed from the active slot. Underneath the weakness and retreat cost, you will see the name of the illustrator, the person responsible for the artwork that is on the card, and then underneath the illustrator, you will see a rarity indicator. This being a 1 diamond card is the most common of all cards in Pokemon TCG Pocket. You will see Squirtle and any other 1 diamond card in abundance when you are opening up packs within the game. Rarities in diamond go from 1 diamond all the way up to 4 diamond, where in 4 diamond you can expect the more powerful EX Pokemon to appear. And then beyond the 4th diamond, there are star rarities. Star Pokemon are replicas that exist within the 1 to 4 diamond range, but they include alternate artwork and things like holo rares and illustration rares, but their abilities are going to be identical to their 1 to 4 diamond counterparts. The rarest of all cards in Pokemon TCG Pocket are going to be crown rares. These are going to be gold, full, holo Pokemon, and the benefit of these are mostly visual, but they are very good looking cards. Next to the rarity indicator is some additional text, things that give you more flavor about the Pokemon. Here though, although for Squirtle, this has no gameplay indicator, for a stronger Pokemon, such as a Blastoise EX, for instance, you'll see that there's an actual rule indicator here, and this does have importance to the game. The EX rule indicates that when a Pokemon EX is knocked out, your opponent gets 2 points. That is, instead of 1. Again, very important to note, because you are only allotted 3 points total that you can lose before your opponent has won the game. That means that while EX Pokemon are extremely strong, they are also a liability on the battlefield, because should you lose one, your opponent is now 1 Pokemon away from winning, and they no longer have to worry about your stronger Pokemon. If they can find a way to knock out one of your weak Pokemon, say that you're even hiding on the bench, the game can be quickly over. Okay, so now you know how to read a Pokemon card, but what about other types other than basic cards? Well, first of all, the rules of Pokemon TCG state that in order for a Pokemon to evolve, it must first have been on a battlefield for a player's turn. That means you must put it down and it must survive the turn that your opponent then has afterwards. Once it is your turn again, you will have the ability to put down a evolution. That means if you go first, if you put down a Pokemon, you do not have the ability to put down energy. However, after your opponent's turn, when they are complete, when it's your turn again, if you have the evolution in hand, you can in fact go forward. In the case of the Pokemon that we have been talking about, Squirtle, it starts off as a basic Pokemon. When you are ready to move on to the next level, you must move that Pokemon on by evolving it. It goes from being a Squirtle to a Wartortle. Here, you see now in the top left corner, there are a couple of additional things that were not there for the basic Pokemon card. You see it is called a Stage 1 Pokemon card. And Stage 1 Pokemon cards must evolve from a basic Pokemon. Also, beneath the card, you'll see it says evolves from Squirtle. In the instance of rules, as far as the Pokemon trading card game is concerned, remember that names are highly important. And so the fact that it says evolves from Squirtle means that it cannot be a card that has any other name other than Squirtle. That means if there were ever a Squirtle EX card, you would not be able to use Wartortle to then evolve from Squirtle EX. It must be called Squirtle. An example that I can show you that's currently in game right now is Pikachu. The regular everyday Pikachu. Isn't that an adorable card? But you see here, this is your regular basic Pikachu. There is also another type of Pikachu called Pikachu EX. It is also a basic card. However, its name is Pikachu EX. And so when you are looking for the evolution of Pikachu, the Raichu can only evolve from Pikachu. If you have a Pikachu EX on the field, it has no evolution, and so its only means of coming off the battlefield will either be the retreat or being knocked out. Now, I'll put both the Squirtle and its evolution on the screen so that you can see the differences in the two cards. First of all, Wartortle is going to have an increased hit point value of 80 now. Also, its move has changed. It now can utilize the move Wave Splash, which has 40 attack damage, but has an increased energy requirement. Now, not only does it require 1 water energy, but it also requires 1 colorless energy or any type of energy. So why is colorless or having any other type other than the Pokemon's type important? Well, sometimes you're going to have a deck that may have multiple types. You may have a water and lightning type. You might have a water and a fire type deck in which the Pokemon exist within the same deck. This is perfectly fine and a viable strategy, albeit a very complicated one, and especially when you only have 20 cards within a deck. However, should you choose to go and create a dual type or even a tricolor Pokemon deck, note that you do have the option to choose those energy types to be generated by the energy zone. Now, this isn't a deck conversation, but it is an important conversation as far as building is concerned. When you have more than one energy type in a deck, you are basically at the whim of the random generator as far as which of those energies are going to generate per turn. If you have 2 types, then that's going to be a 50-50 chance every turn. If you have 3 types, then there's about a 33% chance of any one particular energy being generated. For 4 types, that's 25%, so forth and so on. So as you can see, while you might have this grand idea of putting all the strongest Pokemon from all the types into one deck, it would be extremely volatile and very difficult to pull off. Beyond that, you'll notice that the weakness and retreat cost are the same, although this is not always the case. Sometimes evolving a Pokemon can change its retreat cost, or it may even change its weakness. For instance, the Voltorb card. Here, you'll see that its retreat cost is normally 1 colorless energy. Electrode actually has a free retreat cost. That means when the Electrode is the active Pokemon, at your choice, whenever it is an available option for you, you may retreat this Pokemon onto the bench and take no energy off of it. That kind of makes Electrode a decently strong card. The other thing to note, as we have spoken before, is that stronger cards generally increase the rarity of the card. And here you'll see that Wartortle is in fact a 2 diamond card. Wartortle is not the strongest evolution that Squirtle can achieve. The common form is the regular stage 2 Blastoise. You'll see here now it has hit points of 150, making it a very durable Pokemon. And it has a new move, Hydro Pump. However, you also might notice that there is some text underneath it. This is going to be your first indicator that a move not only does damage, but it has a stipulation underneath it or some sort of mechanic that happens when this attack happens. Let's read. Hydro Pump does 80 damage and has a plus indicator. It says if this Pokemon has at least 2 extra water energy attached, this attack does 60 more damage. That means that normally, while Blastoise can reliably give you 80 damage, if you've been able to pump it up with 2 more energy, then you're going to get 140 damage per attack. Imagine then also that the Pokemon that you're fighting has a water weakness, which would increase that damage plus 20. You would get 160 damage off of this Blastoise. It's a very, very powerful card, but it gets better. This is the Blastoise EX. Now, hold on and rock with me on this, right? Remember I said that names are important. This card also evolves from Wartortle, and that means you can have both the regular Blastoise as well as the Blastoise EX and have Wartortle evolve from either of those cards. So keep in mind the difference. A card that has a different name, such as Pikachu and Pikachu EX, represent 2 cards that do not have the same evolution path. Only Pikachu can evolve into Raichu because Raichu evolves from Pikachu, not Pikachu EX. However, Blastoise and Blastoise EX both evolve from the same card, Wartortle. And so you do have the ability to have both of those. Hopefully that's not too confusing. Blastoise EX has a hit point indicator of 180, so even more of a durable Pokemon than its common counter type. Also, Blastoise EX has 2 attacks that it can do, Surf and Hydro Bazooka. Now, you can only choose 1 attack per turn, so you can either do Surf or you can do Hydro Bazooka. Now you might be thinking, why would I ever do Surf when Hydro Bazooka is available? Well, the point here is that Blastoise EX is a much more versatile Pokemon. There might be a time in which Blastoise EX is forced onto the battlefield a little earlier than usual, in which case you may not have Hydro Bazooka ready. If you only had Blastoise, then you would have to wait another turn, or at least try to create an opportunity for more energy to be put onto Blastoise, whereas Blastoise EX can be ready by the second energy to start doing damage. On this 3rd turn, Hydro Bazooka is ready to go. So, more versatility always offers you a better opportunity for more attacks or more options as far as what it is that you want to do on the battlefield. That makes Blastoise EX the superior option. But again, remember, EX rule. If this Pokemon gets knocked out, your opponent is going to get 2 points instead of just 1 with Blastoise. And there's those type of decisions that you have to make as far as whether or not Blastoise EX or Blastoise, or just whether or not this Pokemon needs to be on the active slot in this given time. Also, look at this border. That's just sweet. Now, every Pokemon attack isn't purely about doing damage. Let's talk about Psyduck. All right, Psyduck is a basic Pokemon. You see 60 hit points, water type, all the things that you already know. It has a move called Headache, and this is the first indicator where you see a Pokemon's type and its energy requirements are not identical. Psyduck can use any type of energy in order to use its move, Headache, which only does 10 damage. Not very strong, but it does have a very strong skill set. Your opponent can't use any supporter cards from their hand during their next turn. And while we haven't talked about supporter cards, know that supporter cards have a very, very strong strategic component as to what they do on the battlefield and what they allow you or your opponent to do in the preceding turn. And so it is important that if Psyduck is on the field and it prevents you or your opponent from using supporter cards, it can drastically change the strategy for that following turn. Pokemon don't just have attacks, but they have abilities. Here, this Pokemon, Cloyster, which is a stage 1 evolution, it has an ability called Shell Armor. It means that this Pokemon takes -10 damage from attacks. That means any Pokemon attacks that is going to receive, whereas it would have received that damage, you take 10 away before you apply it to the Pokemon. So in this instance, if a Cloyster was fighting another Cloyster, rather than receiving 70 damage from Surf, it would only receive 60. That might not seem like a lot, but in a game in which sometimes 10 damage makes all the difference, the ability to reduce damage is super important. Sometimes abilities don't have to do with damage directly. Here is a Pokemon called Magneton, and its ability Volt Charge means that once during your turn, you may take a electric energy from your energy zone and attach it to this Pokemon. Now, here's the thing that we haven't talked about yet. Abilities apply whether a Pokemon is on the active slot or not. That means Magneton actually is allowed to Volt Charge and get that extra energy even when it's sitting on the bench. This makes it a pretty interesting card because even though it has a spinning attack that requires 4 energy to do, it can be building that energy up on the bench and be ready to go. Now, there's actually a much different strategy that you'll be using Magneton for, but we'll talk about that when we get to the deck building section. Sometimes attack requirements can have a little bit of a more complex necessity. Here, let's talk about Pikachu EX. So Pikachu X has an attack called Circle Circuit, which does 30 damage and requires 2 energy, but that's not the entire story. This attack does 30 damage for each of your benched electric Pokemon. That means 2 things. 1, Pikachu EX is entirely dependent on the Pokemon that are on your bench in order to be able to do attacks. The more Pokemon that are available, the stronger this attack becomes. 30 times each Pokemon. That means if you have a full bench in Pokemon TCG Pocket, Pikachu EX is doing 90 damage per attack. At only 2 energy, having 90 damage is a very, very strong attack. Now, of course, that does mean that you have to keep the bench Pokemon available, and there are a variety of strategies in which decks can deal with that. But when Pikachu is going, Pikachu can be very fast and very strong and very hard to deal with. Sometimes your attacks aren't dependent on the things that you have on the field, but sometimes they can be dependent on coin flips. In fact, coin flips are a very important part of Pokemon TCG Pocket and the regular game, and you're going to see them a lot. Here's a Pokemon called Lickitung. All right, it has 90 hit points, requires 3 energy to do its attack, Continuous Lick. This attack does 60 damage for every time that you flip a coin and get heads. Now, there's a couple things to note, right? Lickitung and its coin flip ability only is going to apply if the first coin lands on heads. That's indicated by the first text. It says flip a coin until you get tails. That means essentially you can look at the success rate of getting any damage off this card at about 50%. The other times that you get at 50%, the likelihood that you get more and more heads is diminishing. We're going to have an entire conversation about the mathematical odds of coin flips in a different video. So that's a little bit more advanced and a little more math. Sometimes your attack not just has dependency on things like coin flips or the amount of Pokemon that you have, but sometimes an attack or an ability may put onto a Pokemon something called a special condition. This is really the first time that we're having this discussion. It's probably a good time to go into it. So, Grimer, 70 hit points, has an attack called Poison Gas, requires 1 darkness energy, and does 10 attack. On top of that, the text says your opponent's active Pokemon is now poisoned. Poisoned is one of many special conditions that can happen within this game. They can be put to sleep, they can be confused, they can be paralyzed, or they can be burned. And all of these come with a variety of factors as far as how you can handle that, what requirements there are in order to take that special condition away, so forth and so on. We'll get into that in a future video, but for now, just know that special conditions exist and they can cause your Pokemon to go through varying degrees of pain. Now, let's discuss another special type of Pokemon. Here, this is a stage 1 Pokemon called Kabuto. It has 90 hit points, a shell attack that does 40 damage and requires 1 fighting energy. Now, what's so special about this Pokemon? Well, if you look at the evolution text, Kabuto evolves from something called Dome Fossil. Now, what you may be thinking is, oh, okay, cool. So there's a Pokemon called Dome Fossil, right? Wrong. There is an item called Dome Fossil. Let's read this text. So Dome Fossil is an item card. We have not talked about item cards yet, all right? Item cards are a special card called trainer cards. Trainer cards come in 3 varieties: items, supporters, and Pokemon tools. Dome Fossil has hit points. Items generally do not have hit points, but this is a special type of item, and we need to talk about it first before we talk about the rest of the items. The text says, play this card as if it were a 40 hit point basic colorless Pokemon. At any time during your turn, you may discard this card from play, and this card cannot retreat. So that's a lot of information. Let's break it down. That means I can put it on the bench as if it were a Pokemon. I can also put it in the active slot as if it were a Pokemon. Now, why would I ever do that? Dome Fossil can attack. It only has 40 hit points. It's probably going to die in a turn. That's not really the way you want to think about Dome Fossil. This item can be done in one of 2 ways. You put it on your bench while you have an active Pokemon available, and while that Pokemon is out there doing its thing and attacking, you are then allowed to evolve Dome Fossil into a Pokemon. Now, Kabuto just happens to be the Pokemon that's in the game right now as far as genetic apex is concerned. Depending when you actually see this video, there may be a variety of other Pokemon that have been added to the game in which they can also evolve from Dome Fossil. That kind of makes Dome Fossil a variety card that has a little bit of strength to it, because you can include multiple types of Pokemon when there are multiple Pokemon that can evolve from it. For now, though, just know the card pool is pretty limited in that regard. It also says at any time during your turn, you may discard this card from play. And that's a little stronger than you may realize if you haven't been playing the game for a long time. Being able to discard the card rather than it having to go into the active field in order to get knocked out, in order for it to be discarded, gives it a lot of versatility. That means I can park this card in a bench spot, and if I get a better Pokemon in hand that I want to put out there instead, I can just discard it and then put it on the bench. And in the regular rules, if a Pokemon is put on the bench, the only way that that Pokemon is escaping is either through combat and getting knocked out, or through some other card that allows it to be taken off of the field and being put back into your hand or into the deck, such as Koga, which can do that with Muck and Weezing. Also, this card can't retreat. You can't retreat it back onto the bench to then allow another active Pokemon to go out and battle. Other than that, the evolution rules are the same. Dome Fossil needs to be on the field for a turn, and once your opponent has completed their turn, upon your return, you are able to then evolve Dome Fossil into the Pokemon of your choosing. Note that there are also other Pokemon and other fossil types, such as Helix Fossil, which also has the exact same rule set, but has a different set of Pokemon that can evolve from it, and Old Amber, which again follows the same rule set and has a third set of Pokemon of which it can evolve into. But the fossils are not the only type of item card. You have potions, which heal 20 damage from one of your Pokemon, Pokeballs, which allow you to find one randomly chosen basic Pokemon from your deck and put it directly into your hand, Hand Scope, which requires your opponent to reveal their entire hand to you. There are a variety of item cards that are available to you, and my suggestion to you is, with those shop tickets that you are getting, go and buy all of the promo cards that are out there initially. You essentially may need multiple items and multiple training cards for any deck that you're wanting to build, and they are essential. So go ahead and craft those cards immediately. Items are also not the only trainer card type that you can run into. You can actually run into supporters. Supporters are trainers that have varying degrees of effective strategies that apply essentially based on the type of deck that you've created. For instance, Erica heals 50 damage from one of your grass type Pokemon. Now you might remember that potions only do 20 healing, and so Erica has the ability to heal more than double that, but it only applies to grass type Pokemon. That means if you're going to create a grass deck, you're probably having some heavy consideration on including Erica into your deck. Another example of a trainer that is both important and a little controversial is Misty. Misty has text that says, choose one of your water Pokemon and flip a coin until you get tails. For each heads, take a water energy from the energy zone and attach it to the Pokemon. Why is this so controversial and so strong, right? Well, when you go first in Pokemon TCG, the one thing that you cannot do is you cannot attach energy on the first turn. That is why most people have a preference for going second, because the person who goes second has the ability to attack first. Misty, being a supporter card, is a card that you can use on turn 1. And so if you go first and you use Misty, there is a very good possibility that you will be able to attach Pokemon energy and thus be able to attack on the first turn. You might be lucky enough to power up an EX Pokemon that has the ability to knock out the opponent in the first turn. Now, Misty is controversial because everybody recalls the one time that Misty flipped 6 coins and powered up a Pokemon to a ridiculous strength. Misty's really not actually that bad of a card. Just know in the future, we're gonna have a math conversation about Misty. Sometimes supporter cards are not related to a deck type. Sabrina is one of the more versatile and, I'm gonna be honest, probably the most important supporter card that you could add or choose to omit from a deck. Sabrina says, switch out your opponent's active Pokemon to the bench, and your opponent chooses the new active Pokemon. Sabrina sometimes can end a game instantly. If there's a weak Pokemon on the bench that doesn't have a lot of hit points and you're nearing victory, Sabrina can force your opponent to put that weak Pokemon up front, get that last attack in, and guarantee you victory. Make a good choice when you decide whether or not Sabrina is or is not going to be in your deck, because having this ability can sometimes literally be the victory or the defeat of the game. Let's talk about things like alternate art cards, right? For instance, here is a Pikachu card. Now, I'll put side by side the normal art card of Pikachu and alongside this alternate art Pikachu, right? You may note that everything seems to be identical. Its hit points, its name, the energy required for its attack name, weakness, so forth and so on. But you may notice at the bottom left that there is not a rarity indicator to this card. And that is because this Pikachu card is not available through normal means. You cannot get this card through a pack pickup. Sometimes cards are going to be available through promo packs. Promo packs are going to be limited edition cards that either require you to do certain things within the app, like complete a mission, complete an event. Sometimes it is a pack that is available through either shop tickets or through event tickets for a limited amount of time. Be on the continuous lookout in the shop for cards that may have limited availability. Sometimes these are going to be cards that are not that difficult to actually obtain and allow you to get a very specific Pokemon without having to rip open 100 packs to try to find it or using up your pack points to craft it. Also, all promo cards are not identical. Generally speaking, you can usually expect a promo version of a card to be gameplay wise identical to its counterpart in the packs. However, Mankey is an example where that is not the case. And we talked about these two cards earlier, but I wanted to bring the conversation back up whilst discussing promo packs. This promo Mankey has a 30 damage reckless charge attack. And the reason that this Mankey is different is because both of these cards, although they are different in name, different in attacks, they're both called Mankey, and thus they are considered the same named Pokemon, which means they both evolve into this card, Primeape. Primeape has a attack called Fight Back. If this Pokemon has damage on it, this attack does 60 more damage. Now, why is that important? Well, the regular Mankey cannot do damage to itself. It can only do its low kick attack for 20 hit points, meaning the promo Mankey can essentially activate its evolution without having to receive damage from the opponent. Now, sometimes your opponent may just not know what Mankey evolves into, and so they may recklessly attack your basic Mankey, and then you can primate and fight back. But some opponents are going to be wary of that, and they're going to wait until they can either destroy Mankey completely, or they may even Sabrina Mankey from the active slot, forcing you to then use a different strategy. That wraps up the basics of everything you need to know in order to be able to read a Pokemon card. You have enough knowledge now to go through your entire collection, be able to ascertain those Pokemon strengths, weaknesses, how it can evolve, what it evolved from, all of the items and supporters, and how they may allow you to create strategies. And now we're going to talk about deck building.